What is up, space pirates? This is your Admiral, the charmingly churlish Dr. Disaster, and one of the most infuriating things to happen in video game spaces in the past few years has been the rise in AAA gaming of the concept of the modern audience.
I hate these guys.
Too many game studios have bought into this idea that the best way to make video games is to try to universalize them as much as possible, so that they can maximize the number of people who will play these games. In other words, they want to appeal to this so-called modern audience. Now, when doing this, an awful lot of the time, what this means is that the developers feel the need to race swap and gender swap characters because they're under the impression that what sells a game is diversity.
What in the hell's diversity?
Nobody cares.
But what these people fail to understand is that actually what sells a video game is not the immutable characteristics of the characters or some universally appealing story. What sells it is fun gameplay and an engrossing story made by passionate developers. And in fact, usually the enjoyment of the story is based on some level of exclusivity. Certain people, for example, like Warhammer 40k, and if you changed the game Warhammer Space Marine 2 so that it no longer comes off as quite so bleak and violent, sure, there might be some people out there who would suddenly be compelled to play that game that wouldn't have played it before, but by doing so you would have lost the essence of what Warhammer is, and Warhammer fans would look at that shit and say,
What the hell is that shit?
And that brings me to this news here, that the former Devil May Cry and Dragon's Dogma director Hideaki Itsuno has talked about wanting to do something new in the industry. Right after Dragon's Dogma 2 came out last year, there were rumblings that he was eyeballing a brand new sort of project, which it looks like he is working on something new with a different company, but in a recent interview, he disclosed the problem with the AAA studios that are plaguing the industry, that too many of these big name studios are obsessed with playing it safe. That's why we don't see many new franchises, because when guys like this try to push something new, they are reined in, and these AAA studios just ask for more of the same of what they've already gotten, most likely with just a gender or race swapped version of main characters, because they are always trying to pander to progressive tourists. This is why so many games like Assassin's Creed Shadows flounder in the industry when they should have been hugely popular, because when you make games for everyone, you lose the core audience, and what you're really doing is making shit for no one.
You're a pit of despair. You disgust me. You disgust everyone.
Alright, me hearties, make sure that you hit the like button on this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Also, I've started uploading some content onto Rumble as well, so make sure to follow me over there, and don't forget to follow me over on X, where my handle is Dr. Disaster 1. And anyhow, it is incredible how this mentality has spread throughout the gaming industry like it's a frickin' plague, this attitude where game developers all bought into the idea that games are only successful if you broaden the audience as much as possible, stretching an IP out as thin as possible to the point that it becomes virtually unrecognizable. And it isn't just video games either, it's movies and TV shows and stuff like that as well. Nobody is willing to try anything new at these big studios because they don't want to risk offending anyone, and they all want to do whatever the bean counters at the top of these studios consider to be the safest things. This is why we rarely see new IPs come into being. Everything is always just sequels, prequels, remakes, and reboots. our culture has become stagnant because corporations are so damned insistent on sticking with making sequels to things that people already enjoy. The hilarious thing, though, is that they simultaneously have this aversion to risk, while at the same time they often risk everything by jumping headfirst into culture war shit the way that Assassin's Creed Shadows did. Or another example would be Dragon Age the Veilguard. Or, if you want a movie version of this sort of failure, look at how The Marvels tried to turn the MCU into a girl brand. What this sort of thing tells me is that the way that things are being run in the entertainment industry is not born out of some genuine, deeply held philosophy or principle. It's not that the executives at these companies are naturally risk-averse or addicted to risk. This is all just groupthink achieved by a series of yes-men who don't actually believe in anything. Somewhere out there, some bigwig at one of these companies said that it was unwise to try anything new. They said, let's just keep repackaging all of the old franchises from the 80s and 90s into new movies and new games because that's safe. And everybody listened, everybody went along with it, and the groupthink set in. But a whole bunch of progressive jackasses took over the industry, and they are simultaneously pushing all of the gender and race swap crap, which is just about the least safe approach to making new entertainment. So the whole thing is just absolutely incoherent. There is not any philosophical through line that underpins the way that they're doing things in the entertainment industry. It doesn't make sense. Anyhow, that brings me to this article here from Games Radar, where they talk about this interview with the director of Devil May Cry and Dragon's Dogma, where this guy kinda spills the beans on how these new projects are chosen. And what's really sad to me is that even though this guy has all kinds of ideas which sound really creative and interesting, he has been convinced by the bean counters at the head of Capcom that these ideas would never sell. And of course, the problem is that these bean counter sorts of people are just trying to appeal to that broad, modern audience that just doesn't really exist. But let's read the article. Hideaki Itsuno, a Capcom veteran with credits on iconic games like the Devil May Cry series and both Dragon's Dogma entries, explains why he isn't able to produce the sorts of titles he'd like to. They're too out there, apparently. Itsuno, who most recently directed Devil May Cry 5 and Dragon's Dogma 2 before departing from Capcom to start work on his own new project, a mysterious AAA game, reveals as much in an interview with Famitsu as later translated by Automaton. After confirming that his upcoming title was pitched by him directly and accepted without any problems, he states that he's not actually developing the kind of game he's always dreamed of making, and that is what I'm talking about here. The guy has been convinced that his ideas, which really appeal to him, just wouldn't work. And it's sad because this is a talented developer, he's clearly a gamer, and what he thinks would be cool would probably be looked at as very cool by gamers as well. But this guy has been brainwashed into thinking that his ideas just don't work. But the article continues, strictly speaking, no, admits Itsuno, and it all boils down to the fact that the market likely doesn't have space for such games. I think the kind of games I'd most like to make probably wouldn't sell, they'd be too out there to be judged as commercially viable. I am well aware of this myself, so instead I extract specific elements from those game ideas and combine them with elements I know from experience will work. That's how I'm building our new title. The former Devil May Cry and Dragon's Dogma director adds, whenever I'm asked to propose new projects, I usually submit 5 or 6 ideas and mix in about 2 that I really want to do, but they never get chosen. It is this method of deciding what gets made that has prevented turn-based combat as an example from being used much in gaming these days. If Sandfall Interactive, the makers of Clair Obscure Expedition 33, if they had pitched their turn-based combat game at some big corporate studio, it likely would not have been made. They would have been told that that sort of combat doesn't work these days, that people don't want it, and they would have been pushed into incorporating their ideas into an already established IP, which is really sad as hell when you think about it, because that game ended up selling many millions of copies. It is likely to be considered one of the candidates for Game of the Year this year. And it's also sad as hell that guys like Itsuno, who is credited with being a major creative force behind the Devil May Cry series, taking over as director of the franchise in the second game. But it's sad as hell that guys like that are so hamstrung. But this is why AAA gaming is struggling so hard, and AA games and indie studios are thriving. The AAA stuff is usually just regurgitated slop. It is bland and stagnant. A few decades ago, talented devs were allowed to create new IPs like Devil May Cry. Now, the big studios have turned into a very different, nonsensical animal. But I'm gonna leave it there. Drop your contempt for the state of AAA gaming into the comment section below, and we will talk there. Thanks for watching me, Hearties. If you haven't already, your Admiral is inviting you to subscribe to the channel and become a part of the crew. Life as a space pirate may not be glamorous, but there's always plenty of booty.